we got a completely new and authentic dungeon in Season of Discovery, Demonfall Canyon. But what is stopping the devs from making more dungeons?
Honestly, nothing.
They cooked Demonfall Canyon up in about 3 weeks, and that's not a very long time. So knowing that they can make a brand new dungeon that's authentic and feels natural to the classic ecosystem, we're probably going to get way more dungeons in the coming phases, and if not this season, in next season or on Classic Plus. So let's actually take a look at all the possible dungeons that they can make, what they exactly are. Now, before we discuss all the new dungeons, we're going to discuss Demonfall Canyon and just break down why it works and why it's so actually good for the classic lifestyle. So Demonfall Canyon is set in the southern part of Ashenvale, in the location of Demonfall Canyon essentially, and that's where Grommash killed Manaroth back in Warcraft 3. Really iconic cinematic, and it helped build the Warcraft universe as we know it today. But that's part of what makes Demonfall Canyon so actually unique. So they went to a place that was based off existing lore. Nobody went to a quest that, and there was actually nothing to really do there minus some random fringe quests. It's an iconic part of the world that was put there just for the sake of being part of that world. So going there and then instancing it off to make a completely new dungeon, it fit perfectly. Like quite literally, one of the bosses, the Athoris, which is the random NPC for most of Classic, he got a quest in TBC, but again, nobody really quested there, so almost everybody missed it. And then to top it all off, when they did make Demonfall Canyon, as they instanced it off, they added a whole bunch of new models and bosses that were kind of lore accurate. For example, the Athoris is already an NPC in-game, and then on top of that, they added the Phantom of Hellscream. And that's essentially Grommash's Phantom, his rage, his anger left over. And that makes sense because he was the orc that started the demon corruption that affects all orcs. That's the reason they're green in lore today. It's because Grommash drank the blood from Manaroth and then created the Horde, which led to the First War and the Second War and all the lore events that happened afterwards. So it makes sense that his anger was left over there after defeating Manaroth. And it all makes sense because just considering all the elite demons, the bosses there, just the placement of things, it felt natural to Classic. And that's one of the key things with adding new content to the Classic lifestyle, is that it has to make sense in an authentic way. A lot of things in Season of Discovery have been praised and hated. Some things are too modern, some things are too retail, some things are this, some things are that. But Demonfall Canyon is almost universally praised, minus its kind of mediocre loot. It has some really amazing trinkets in there and some really solid pieces of loot, but the loot just isn't that great overall. But that's a different topic that has nothing to do with the dungeon itself being good. The loot could be better itemization, but the dungeon, it's actually amazing, and I really like what it does for the world. Overall, it's a legitimate location. It makes perfect sense in the world and the story and the lore, and it fits Classic perfect. And one of the nicest things about it is with Season of Discovery, there's a lot of power creep. Dungeons are trivial, they're very easy. People essentially didn't struggle in any dungeon. People were under-leveled, but overpowered, and just all the runes made dungeons incredibly trivial. But Demonfall Canyon had a couple mechanics that you actually had to do. Now, was it hard? By no means. It's still an easy dungeon. But compared to, for example, UBRS, which became a joke in Season of Discovery, Demonfall Canyon actually had you try just a little bit. And that's nice to have in Season of Discovery where everything is essentially a joke. But now that I've broken down Demonfall Canyons, we can actually deep dive into all the new dungeons, all the new locations, all the new things that they can add to Season of Discovery in later phases, if not in later phases, in later seasons or in Classic Plus. And based on the recent interviews from Hammerdance and me, they're definitely going to be making Classic Plus. That's pretty much a given conclusion, especially with the survey going around. Classic Plus is coming, but we might get a new season in between, or they might just drag out Season of Discovery long enough so we get to like phase 16 before Classic Plus comes out. Again, we're gonna wait and see, but the experiment at a Season of Discovery has so much more room for them to keep experimenting, and it took them 3 weeks to make Demonfall Canyon. So imagine we get a new dungeon every phase. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but heck, a new world boss, a new raid, a new dungeon. There's so much that they can do, but this video is just about dungeons. And one thing I do want to add before I talk about all the extra dungeons is we're likely going to be able to get a whole new set and tier of gear. Now, what do I mean? We have tier 1, 2, 3 for raids. That's Blackwing Lair, AQ, Nax. Well, AQ has its own separate tier. It's essentially 2.5. But we had tier 1 in MC, tier 2 in Blackwing Lair, and tier 3 in Nax. But we're likely going to get a more 0.5 tier. So the 0.5 tier was the first dungeon set, but what if we get a 1.5? What if between Blackwing Lair and now, we get a whole new dungeon quest line for essentially the tier 3.5 5, the tier 2.5, the tier 1.5. They can do so much with these new tier quest lines that make people go back to dungeons and start grinding them, because it might be slightly worse than your raid gear, but if you're gearing up your ult and all this stuff, maybe the itemization is just a little better to get a couple of pieces of 1.5 or 2.5 or whatever the hell. Overall, there's so much they can do with these new dungeons that make it worth grinding for all the players. So I'm just going to start off with an iconic one that everybody's wanted for essentially 2 decades, one that just people expect at this point. Grimbutal. Again, now that you can make instance things, you can essentially make the dungeon the journey to Grimbutal, but the gate can stay blocked for now. But you can essentially make that dungeon the opening of the gate at the bottom and having to fight our way through the red dragons or the orcs or whatever, getting up to the entrance of Grimbutal and having the dungeon end there. And then they can make Grimbutal proper a whole ass raid later on or in Classic Plus. Or they can just make it a multifaceted location like Blackrock Mountain. You can have the Grimbutal dungeon, the Grimbutal raid, maybe a Grimbutal open world dragon boss. Again, it does depend on exactly how many resources they have and what the plan is, but Grimbutal is essentially one of the perfect locations to build a multifaceted, multi-phase, multi-encounter experience just because of its iconic location. Cataclysm did show us what Grimbutal would look like, but it didn't utilize Grimbutal to its full potential, because they turned the Grimbutal area into a whole zone. They added a whole different raid in there. They just made it a bigger location, but Grimbutal itself just wasn't used as well as it should have been. A single 5-person dungeon, in my opinion, was kind of disrespectful to Grimbutal as an experience. Grimbutal should have been one of the core raids that came out in Cataclysm. That's not to say the dungeon was bad, the dungeon was amazing, but in Classic Plus or Season of Discovery or any later seasons, Grimbutal should be used correctly, because there's so much to unpack there. Technically, lore-wise, Xal'atath is at the depths of Grimbutal right now because it was her dagger that led to the corruption that happened. Again, what if, because they're tying the lores back into Classic and the vanilla ecosystem to make it seem like, Xal'atath was there from the beginning. Same thing with the Jailer. He did everything. The Jailer went back and did everything. He was behind Arthas, Illidan, the whole shebang. It was all part of his master plan to stop us from the mystery enemy coming that's conveniently forgotten as of now in the War Within. Nonetheless, Grimbutal has so much potential and it has to be used. Now, will it be used immediately? Probably not. But let's talk about a location that will probably get used to be a dungeon or a raid. Kazan Crips. Now, people want Kazan Crips to be a raid, but Kazan Tower and Kazan Crips are both finished in the vanilla ecosystem. If you go back into the vanilla files, the entirety of Kazan, top to bottom, is accessible. You can go through it, you can go all the way up. There's multiple rooms, there's multiple locations, and then there's the separate Kazan Crips. Again, both locations are finished. The main key difference is that despite both locations being finished, there's actually nothing to really do there. The doodads aren't finished, most encounter mechanics aren't finished, they haven't actually placed a lot of decorations or whatnot. For the most part, both the Kazans are empty, but that gives the devs plenty of room to be creative and do whatever they want. They completely redid Kazan Crips in TBC, but the vanilla model is still there, it's available. All they have to do is add some doodads, add some NPCs, add a couple quest lines. Heck, they can even make an entrance world boss that's instance. For example, the Keeper of the Tower or something that you have to defeat once to get a key that lets you access the crypts and the tower. And then they could make either the tower a dungeon, or the crypts a raid, or the crypts a dungeon and the tower a raid. Or heck, you can make the crypts a raid, and then you can have the tower be the bottom half of Kazan as a dungeon, and then they can eventually make the full Kazan Tower as a raid down the line in a different phase or a different part of Season Discovery or Classic Plus. Another huge one that everybody's been clamoring for is Caverns of Time. Now, I know many people don't actually know this, but Caverns of Time is already finished in Classic, and it was meant to be in Classic, but they ran out of time. By Classic, I mean Vanilla, mind you. But back in Vanilla, the Caverns of Time was meant to be a location you could traverse in and enjoy all these old location experiences. The Black Morass dungeon in TBC was finished in Classic. Keep saying Classic, Vanilla. The Black Morass dungeon was finished in Vanilla. Have the Black Morass be the opening dungeon in Vanilla, in the Classic ecosystem, and then from there, in a later phase, they could add a different location. The Siege of Stratholme, the Gnoll Wars. People might not know this, but there was a ginormous war between all the Gnolls and the humans of Stormwind, because the Gnolls were like, you humans are encroaching upon our territory. Rah! And so the humans put them down. That's why Hogwarts is such a menace. Lore-wise, Hogwarts is actually way more important forth, and then just a quick level 10 boss you do and move on. So essentially doing an alternate little timeline where they just instance off the entrance of Stormwind and have us have to fight through progressive null bosses until we fight Hogger's Granddad or some shit would be funny, would be interesting, and people would like it. They can essentially instance off any part of the world to make a dungeon now. So why not? You can do the same thing with Stratholm. You can do the same thing with different parts of the world. The Cavern of Time lets them do so much in the vanilla system. They could essentially do the Troll Wars. Back when the trolls were fighting the elves of Silvermoon and the human empire of Arathor, this was before Lordaeron and Oldum split off, just so you guys know. Like, I'm not gonna go on a lore tangent, but there used to be one human empire, the Arathor Empire, and then Arathor split off and became Stormwind, Alterac, Arathor, Lordaeron, you know, just long story. But essentially, the Caverns of Time has the option to let us experience 100 unique locations, 100 unique events in that classic ecosystem. They could essentially make the War of the Shifting Sands when the Night Elves 10,000 years ago went to war with the Karaji at the Battle of Ahn'Qiraj, where they were stopping the encroaching Karaji horde. There are so many events that are just easy enough to cook, are lore relevant, and wouldn't even be that necessarily complex or difficult to get the models of. Like, just take the models from AQ 20 and 40 and make a couple extra bosses and just have us fight through Silithus going down. A couple of trash packs essentially just block us in, kind of railroad us in a direction, but there's so much that they can do. And this is me cooking up ideas in the span of a couple of days, just looking at what already exists. The devs made something completely unique with Demonfall Canyon, and nobody expected that to be a dungeon. So they're clearly very creative, and they have the capability to add new dungeons, new locations, and they now have access to the art team from retail, so they can start creating brand new characters, brand new models. Now, with the Caverns of Time, I could essentially make 100 unique ideas, 100 unique events, 100 unique different encounters, but I'm not going to, because this video would be 2 hours long. So if people want to hear about that, maybe I'll do like another video later on. But for now, we're going to move on to another thing that people are more excited about. We have the Gates of Uldum. So Uldum was meant to be either this underground zone dungeon raid area, or was meant to be an above ground zone dungeon raid area like it was in Cataclysm. Again, the exacts of it are kind of lost to us, but you can see here on this map what the OG vanilla map was meant to look like. And you can see all the things they were cooking and planning. For example, level 70 as a level cap. Now, we can't do that because that changes too much. What ifs have a level where just because I tried to rebuild the original intent, it takes it away from being classic or vanilla. This is the what if we're talking about. So we're not going to get level 70 or anything like that. But that could be a unique encounter. We could go in there, go through the gate, an underground little zone. They could take Uldum on location, repurpose it, expand it. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but they still have access to the terrain modeling tools. It shouldn't be that hard to make a brand new dungeon that's underground. And again, they could still lock off the zone of Uldum and just say, whoops, adventurer, the gate's blocked, you can't get past here. But at least we got to clear the dungeon of Uldum, right? But again, there's so many creative ways to go about things that even if they can't build a whole brand new ass zone from the get-go, they can still expand and fill in all the lore gaps that have people wondering and curious about the mysteries of vanilla Azeroth. We have the Barrow Dens in Hyjal. Now, if Hyjal does get finished as a zone, and it will be in Classic Plus, there's going to be new dungeons in there, as well as a brand new raid. Now, the Barrow Dens is a raid location. It was one of the OG raids. It was Illidan's prison. You were meant to go in there. There's going to be the Wardens and the Night Elves that were unhappy with the Alliance because they didn't want the Night Elves to join any of the mortal factions. The Night Elves were meant to be independent. They were meant to be neutral and part of their own thing. And they're still upset with the Horde and the Alliance. So there was meant to be like a negative anti-alliance Night Elf faction that both the Horde and the Alliance were fighting in Hyjal. Again, none of this ever came to fruition. This was all scrapped, and then Hyjal became its own separate thing in Cataclysm. But this is vanilla. We already have the unique storyline of the Night Elves in Arathi talking about those scenarios of the Night Elf separatist move. So there's so many ways they could make Hyjal interesting that makes sense lore-wise for the Alliance and Horde to be there, fighting, combat, all of that. Again, the Barrow Dens was probably going to be a raid, but there are other dungeon locations. In fact, they could even do as 2 layers. Upper Barrow Dens as a dungeon, lower Barrow Dens as a raid. But again, there's so many ways they can do this. They don't even have to build a whole new dungeon or raid environment. They can just do an instance open world location and make that a dungeon, because that seems to be easier to do than building brand new location assets. So they can just instance off the entrance to Hyjal as the Siege of Hyjal, and as a dungeon we have to break through it, kill the demons, and then unlock Hyjal and gain access to it, right? There's so many ways they can make interesting content in the old world with this new instance technology. Any single part of the old world can become a dungeon or a raid or a world boss, and that's what makes Season of Discovery's future, as well as Classic Plus's future or the next season's future, so goddamn exciting. We have the Dark Iron Highway behind Baelgar and BRD. This was meant to be a location, it was meant to be expanded upon, but they ran out of time and then they scrapped the lore so the Dark Iron Highway doesn't connect to both Ironforge and Grimbutal. But in the OG lore, I'm pretty sure it was meant to. Again, not canon anymore, but that highway is mysterious. Imagine the old god things down there, imagine the creatures down there, imagine just all the mystery things they could do, because BRD was meant to be a ginormous location. Molten Core was meant to be a part of BRD initially, and then it got spun off into its own raid because Blackwing Lair wasn't even close to being ready at Vanilla's launch. So all I'm saying is there are a dozen different locations they could head off in and let people have fun and enjoy all this amazing content. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. What would you like to see most in Classic Plus or later phases in Season of Discovery? What are you guys most interested in seeing? If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe. If you hate this video, like and subscribe anyways. What do you have to lose? Thank you all. Ebonheart out.